Hello! I almost forgot I was streaming today. Oh, it's one of those days. I've only had a couple of coffees and I've been doing lots of kind of recording. So I apologize if I'm running a little bit late. Let's just dive into it today. Today we're going to do some API stuff. One of my favorite topics, clearly. I wouldn't work where I work if I didn't like APIs. So we can't build too much of an API yet because, well, we don't know enough yet. So what we do have is we've got groups, we've got posts, we've got users. We can start understanding our API a bit more. So let's start with something basic. Let's go to API roots and start thinking about how we're going to build our API. How do we want our API to work? That user root can just go. I don't like that. I never add it. I always remove it. Zoom. There we go. So our API is, we're going to start with our REST API. We might come back to something like a GraphQL API a little bit later because it's quite common in social networks to have REST and GraphQL APIs. So we'll have a think about that. The first thing that we always do in any API is we want to authenticate. Once we've authenticated, we then want to do things like get my profile, update my profile, all the kind of things that you'd expect to be able to do with your information. Then we're going to want to say, okay, so let's start interrogating our group endpoints and say, you know, I want to get information from this group and I want the post. So I just want to see part of the group, depending on how you might integrate it. Hello. Lots of people joining today. Really appreciate you joining me. Let's have some fun. And then we're going to do some stuff with posting. So this is what we're starting with today, authenticating, kind of user profile-y stuff, getting our group endpoints, and then actually creating a post and posting stuff. We're going to start with plain text, and then we're going to start to look at how we can expand to incorporate images, video, and that sort of stuff. Don't forget to pestify the app. We always pestify an app. This is a Steve stream. It is what we do. So let me make sure that I have Docker running. And then let me just start my container. So we have got everything up and running that we are going to need. And when it comes to building an API, I like to do things in a specific way. So we've got our main roots. Then we're going to create our auth endpoints. So we're going to keep them in there. We're going to use our root facade. And what we're going to say is we want to post to login. And we're going to give that a name of login. Something kind of simple there, right? So we need to create a controller for this. So if we come down to HTTP controllers, we got auth, we got OAuth, and we're going to create an API namespace within here. And we're going to have an auth within there. So we'll start with our login controller. This is going to be an invocable controller. For now, we'll accept the request when we won't return anything just yet. So here we can just say login controller, and we're going to pull in that auth namespace up the top here. This one. So use that, which means we can just say auth login controller. It means we don't have to pull in every single class. Let's zoom out a little bit so you can see it. Hey, Benjamin, how are you doing? I am good. I was just recording a API review video for work on Stripe. So I kind of got a little bit distracted with editing, and then I was like, oh, wow, it's 10:30 and meant to be live. So I've not made a coffee. I've not used the bathroom. I've literally gone, damn it. go live. We'll deal with the problems later. So we're going to use HTTP Pi to start working with this. So I've already done some stuff with recording and stuff. So let's just say our URL. And then we're going to go API auth login. That will complain. We're going to do post request. And we need to actually pull this in. Where am I? Ah, so much going on. PHP Storm's all the way over here. So I've been doing lots of work, so my desktop is just crazy. Stripe's API rate. I can't. Can I give you a sneak peek? Sneak peek. Let's look at API Insights a second. So Stripe, they actually have a really good API. Everybody knows they've got a good API. There's no question about that one. Where is their open API? Can I find it? Where did I leave it? Let's just drop that in. It takes a second. They've got like 500 endpoints. So it's a little bit crazy. Let's have a quick sneak peek for those watching me on stream. It does take a minute. They've got a big API and we've got to do a lot of parsing and aggregating of stuff. So let's just kind of sneak in. They got a D. D across the board. Not the best, but they are good. I'll go into it in more detail on the video. This is HTTP Pi. If you've not used it before, let's just go. Come on. HTTP. Why is my keyboard not working? Okay, it's just not working. There we go. HTTP Pi. It's an API testing client. There's a good CLI. There's a good desktop app. We've got lots of cool stuff. It's really useful actually. So let's go and make sure we've got this registered. So we need to come down to our roots here, and we're going to register our group here. So root, we're going to add some middleware in here later. And then we are going to prefix everything with auth, as auth group. And then we're going to say base path roots API auth.php. This should give us our roots. Let's just make sure we see them. So we've got all our API stuff will obviously be at the top. API auth login uses auth login as a name, and it gives API auth login controller. Perfect. So we can now come to our client again and see what it tells us. We go to 200 OK. We are good to start. So we're going to want a request for this. And we're also going to want to get some middleware in place. So we'll start with a middleware. So what's important when it comes to like an API is understanding where that request is coming from. I like to have a device identifier middleware. And what I'll explain that now. Device identifier. What we do is we want to say, if we don't have a header for X device ID, then throw an exception or identify the request ourselves. So we got a choice here. Do we want to be really strict with it, or do we want to kind of be a bit kinder maybe? I'm going to go for kind today. Headers. Is it set? Yeah. Key. X device ID we need a string helper actually. String UID string. Yes, values. There you go. You can throw an exception, but for now I'm going to be kind. I'm going to say, okay, if you don't give me your device, I'll set one. And then we just return next. What I'm going to do for now is just going to die and dump on that request headers all so we can see it. So we need to make sure we're setting that on the kernel A, B, C, D for device. Device identifier. So I'm going to add that as a global thing up here, which means that when I come here, unexpected variable request. There we go. Host, user agent connection, device ID. Got it. So we can then move forward. This can obviously, actually, I'm going to go back and just show you that again. So what I can do is in my headers, if I say X device ID, you know, this would be something like, I don't know, Steve's Mac Studio. If I just open up Warp quickly, host a, how do I get my machine name again? How do I do it? I can't remember. AI command and X. Command X. How do I get my host name? Here we go. We'll get something like that. So when that device comes back, we get that. And from a mobile app, we'd get something similar. From an SDK, we'd set it manually. Just a nice way to identify that device, really. Obviously, user agent gives us a certain bit of information, but not enough. Host, connection, content length, gives us lots of stuff we can work with. So let's just delete that because we don't want it. And we can focus back in on this login controller. So we've got services for the identity service. So we can do handle OAuth, we can do login, we can do lots of cool stuff here. We can create a payload. But what I'm going to do is I want a way to make a token nicely. So public function create token. And this is going to return a new access token. And we're going to want to pass the user in. So let's walk through this. We want to return user create token where the name is name and the abilities are permissions. And we're not going to set an expiry by default. So we know we're going to want this identity service pulled in. So public function instruct private read only identity service is service. We're going to want to look at validation next. So we can go a make request API auth login request. We can then replace this with that login request. Okay, that did it completely wrong. So we do actually have a login request, a default one that comes with Breeze. Maybe we'll just stick to a default. What's profile updated giving me down here? Email passive. I'd say that's acceptable for what I need, I think. So maybe I'll just stick with this. It's got rate limiting on. Not that we need to rate limit because we've already got rate limiting, but you get what I mean. So maybe we'll just use the default login request that comes with Breeze because it works. So now if we come back, we're getting the home page because we are not setting accept application JSON. There we go. So unprocessable content, the email is acquired, and one more error. So we know what we're doing wrong. So next up, we can say our body. We want to set the email to be just stevemcd@gmail.com, and we'll use my password of password. We are good. Content type that I am passing is application JSON as well. So at this point, we validated, and what we want to do is get a payload back from this. A login payload. So we want to return a new login payload. So the email is this string email to string, and the password is this string password to string, and that gives us what we want. So at this point, we know we can get everything that we need from the login request. We've validated everything. We can create a token shortly, so we can do a login. So if we fail, where the payload is that request payload, if we fail, then we want to throw a validation exception with messages, where the messages, we want to target the email key and say in sort of like just invalid credentials. If we did pass, then we can use the identity service. We can get the registered user, handle OAuth, login using ID. We can add another method and say public function get authenticated user. That should return a user or something. So return this auth user. Could be null. And it's likely to be an authenticatable. There we go. So that would give us some form of user back. So now we can say our token is going to be this service create token. The user is this service get authenticated user. The name is request header. We're going to focus on that X device ID. And then the permissions is just a default, so we don't have to worry about that. So at this point, we've got a token. Let's just die and dump on that token a second. We've got an access token with a plain text token. We look at this access token. we will see on the attributes, we've set the name based on the device ID, and the token is valid and it's there and it's got some abilities. So next up, what we want to do is return that response. So let's just collapse some of this. Inside HTTP, we like to create responses. And then we're going to create a message response. So what this message response is, we need to implement responsible, obviously, because we want to return a JSON response. Let's just cut off that override because we don't like it. We are going to return a JSON response. And within here, we're going to return that new JSON response where the data is whatever we're going to pass in, and the status is going to be some status that we pass in. So let's look at this constructor. Construct private read-only array string data. You can say private read-only status. I need to install a package. Composer require SDK tools. That's in. So now that means I can say status for the status, and we're going to default to OK. And then private read-only string key, we're going to default to message. So we've got something relatively default here. So we can say this key is this data. Status is this status value. And we always like to have headers, right? I like to be very specific with headers. I like to be specific with everything. It's just how I like to build things. Obviously, if you're doing something like this, you don't have to go as far as I might go. But, you know, I do it for a reason. Inside HTTP, I usually create a factories directory. Factories. And within here, we're just going to create a header factory like this. And we're going to have a public static function for default, which is going to return an array of headers. Return an array. So that down on this message response down here, what we can do is say headers is header factory default. Done. So what this will give us is an array of string and mixed, mostly strings. So content type is going to be application JSON. And I'm going to just stick with that for now. We can expand upon it a little bit later. So at this point, we've got a token. What we want to do is return that token. So we can return a new message response where the data is token, plain text token. The status is going to be the default, but the key is going to be token. Can remove that die dump there. Come over to here, and we're going to say this returns a responsible. So create token, authenticatable all user. Let's just do this, and then this is going to be, my mouse went crazy then, an int string. That's all good. It's going to complain about create tokens, so we're going to have to do something like that because it's potentially polymorphic, although it should never be polymorphic. message response, login controller, create token, expects, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's test. We get a token. So now I can copy that token, come over to my environment and say that my token is this. Close that down. I can start making authenticated requests. Let's just close everything else down, close all tabs, and let's just write a test for this because this is realistic product development. We want to be realistic. So feature, identity, endpoints, and login test. So declare some strict types, and let's look what we can do. We want to test that. Let's start with that login controller. We want to test that we can get, maybe the middleware. Test the device identifier middleware works. So that's maybe our first one. So our middleware is going to be a new device identifier middleware. And what we want to do is we're going to get a response from this by saying middleware handle. The request is going to be a request. Create. URI is just that. And the method is a get. Next is going to be just a closure that receives a request. And it will just return a response. Let's say new response. And within there, we can set up as the defaults. So let's just kind of clean some of this up, simplify that one. Simplify that one. We don't actually have to test that one. So at this point, we've got a response. Let me just, have I set that up? No. Let's run a test. 4 failed. Pulse, unsupport to database driver, SQLite. Oh, that's going to be a pain. Pulse, why would you do this to me? Database migrations, let's just kill Pulse off because I'm not using it right now. Pulse tables, we're just going to say bye-bye. Come back to integrating Pulse a little bit later. Device identifier, middleware work, suggested not perform any assertions. Right. Let's get going. So at this point, expect response headers. We want to get the X device ID not to be null. Let's see if that works. And it failed because we're not setting it. So back to that device identifier. What we want to do is we can set the ID to that. Maybe we need to do that outside the loop. So that is always available. No, we don't. No, we don't. No, we don't. What am I thinking? That could cause issues. So let's just say our response is that return that response. And let's just set a type on it so we can use it. Response headers set, where the key is X device ID and the values are request header key X device ID. So we're basically setting the device ID back on the response. And now it's working. So that login test, that response, can I get the request? I can't get the request, can I? Darn it. So we know that the device identifier is going to work. That's all good. So next up, we know we need to look at our validation. So we want to test the login validation works. So we are going to do a post.json request to a URI, which action is going to be login controller, and simplify that and simplify that. So at this point, we are going to assert that the status code is going to be status unprocessable content. And assert JSON validation errors for email and password. That is our test. And it's good. So what have we tested? We have tested that the device ID is always going to be set so that when we hit the login controller, we're always going to get a device ID that we can then assign to that token's name. Then we're looking at the validation. And if we don't pass any data to the login controller, we're going to get the correct status back that we would expect. And we're going to get a validation error for both email and password. Now, we can duplicate this and say for email. So we can pass some data, say password, and just say password. So we can then remove that and say test. Now we know that it's definitely working for password. And then we can do the same thing for the email side. So other way around. Email test at email.com. This may complain, may not. It's all good. Let's just add that validation rule back for the email, because I believe we also checked to see if that exists. No. The password field is required. Cool. We are good. We are testing what we expect to work. So now the login validation stuff has been tested. We can say something like test the authentication logic will complain if credentials are invalid. Now let's just go and do that. So I'm going to post JSON. URI is action login controller. The data is going to be email tested at user.com, and the password is going to be password. We're going to assert a status code of status unprocessable content because it's going to fail, and then we're going to assert the JSON validation error for the key. Can we assert like a message? Assert error, has errors. I suppose we could assert JSON if we really wanted to at that point, right? So let's make sure that's working. One failed, invalid credentials. The following errors occurred during the last request. Failed, asserting that the key has key. Darn it. Wrong thing. Email. There we go. Oh, Steve, what are you doing? Have some coffee and wake up. So that's working. So then we want to say test the endpoint will return a token if authentication passes. So this is where we can do a more in-depth feature test. We can say that our user is a user factory create. Just simplify that one. And then we're going to do a post and assert some status stuff. We're going to post to that, and we're going to say user email, password, assert status, okay. And then what we want to do is assert JSON function, assertable JSON stuff. So let's just simplify that one. And we want to test out the JSON has token as a message. And that's pretty much it. All we care about at this point, that we do have a token. That is working. So then what we can do is something like an expect personal access token query count to equal 1. There we go. So we know we're getting that token back, and we know that we're actually adding a token to the database. And it's all good. So login complete. So now that we've logged in, I'm not going to do register because otherwise it's going to see pretty much a lot of the same stuff I just did. So if we come back to roots, what we want to do is get that user's profile. Now, naming conventions here are very, very different. Some people have like a auth me. Some people have an auth user. There's no correct way to do it, really. There's no, this is how you should 100% do it. There's lots of different opinions. So what I'm going to do is focus this under just one simple endpoint of profiles. So we're going to create a profiles endpoint, and then we're going to use root facades. Let's just come down, and we're going to say our root, when we get to profiles, the name is going to be my profile, something like that. So root middleware. This has auth sanctum on it. So we're going to prefix with profiles as profiles, and we're going to group on the base path for roots API profiles.php. Now, if we do a quick root list, and we're just going to pipe that through grep API so we get what we want. So we got API auth login and API profiles. Profiles, my profile. Good enough for me for now. So now if we come back to our controllers API, and we're just going to say create a new directory for profiles. And within here, we're just going to create a, I don't know, my profile controller, something like that. Actually, no, I'm going to stick to a convention of just index because it is an index request. This will get a public function invoke. You're going to get that request, and we're going to return some form of response shortly. So come over to profiles. We're going to say index controller, and we're just going to use this whole namespace here. And we're just going to clip that off there because we don't want it. So profiles index controller. So once we have authenticated, we can then go ahead and say get from this URL API/profiles. This will give me something. I'm going to use a basic token, which I can copy from here. Bearer token, headers, accept some application JSON. We're getting a 200 OK, which means we can now work on this. So services, we're going to create a profile service. Again, this is going to be very similar to what this accepts up here. So we will want to do database transactions, and we do want to know the authentication stuff. This is a read-only class, so we can add read-only. And next, we just inject that into the controller itself using the constructor, because good practices are important. So private read-only profile controller profile service as service, and we'll make that, fix all of that, and make it read-only. So now we've got this profile service. What we want to be able to do is say, get me the authenticated user with their profile. So public function mine. I know. I don't know why. Return a user query with their profile, find or fail. The ID is this auth ID. Done. And this will return a user model, and we're good. Returns builder model, the collection. Okay, it returns too many things, but it could throw an exception. So, you know, there's always that. So the user is this service mine, and we're just going to dump on it quickly. So now let's just do that. So we've got a user, we've got all of our attributes that we're going to want, and relations, we have a profile. which attributes, we've got that filled in. So we do have everything that we are going to want. We just want to create the way that we respond at this point. So this is where we need to start looking at resources. Make a resource, and we're going to make a profile resource to start with. So now if we just open that profile resource, we can say that the read-only property is a user for that resource. So we're going to have a profile. No, not that. We will just stick to it. We're going to get the user ID. And then what we're going to do is let's open up user on one side so we can understand what we want to do. We're going to have name. We're going to say first name is this resource first name. Last is this resource last name. We should probably add a helper method on here for the name. So public function name is going to return an attribute. And we're going to return a new attribute where the get is going to be this first name followed by this last name, and that's it. So then we can say our full name is this resource name. Like that. This then returns a string. And that is good. We've got the name. Then what we want to do is we want to say that your email, the address is this resource email. And then the verified, we're going to say this resource. Have I not got email up there? Why not? String email. There we go. I like to do these things. So then we got email verified at, and we're going to say if null doesn't equal, if that's not null, then it's verified. If it is null, it hasn't been verified. Next, the provider that you signed up with, this resource provider. Your avatar is this resource avatar. I mean, it'll be nice to do a little bit more with that avatar a little bit later on, but we'll come back to it. So email role. Okay, we can pass back the role as well. So this resource role. And then we do have the profile itself. So we can have a look at the profile, and what we're going to want is the handle needs to come after name because it's kind of one of the important things. This resource profile handle. Email. Then we're going to have country. This resource profile country. Finally, at the end, we are going to have the cover. Actually, no, we're going to create images. And we're going to say that we have the avatar in the images down here. And then we're going to have the cover within there. This resource profile cover. So what we should get out of all of this is a nice thing that we can work with. So let's just close all of that down. Profile resource, profile service, identity service, profiles, index controller. We have got a user that should have their profile. So now we want to return a model response. So we want to come down to responses and we're going to say, let's create a new model response. This implements responsible, which means it needs to return that JSON request response there. So that is a JSON response. And here we want to basically just return that for now, new JSON response. Awesome. Now, index controller. For now, we're just going to return that new model response. And we don't need to do anything else other than say that that is responsible. So getting empty, perfect. Right, let's start dealing with this. First thing is the data, is the user. So model response, public function, instruct. When we return from our API, we want to ensure that we are using resources. So private, read-only, JSON resource as data. We're just going to make that read-only. And then in the data, we are going to say that our data is this data. Data, lots of datas. This then needs to be converted. So new profile resource, where the resource is the user. So data ID name, get set with caching. Okay, so we need to just quickly, I think I should be able to just do that. There we go. First, last, middle, handle, email, country, provider, role, images. Eventually, I'd like to take the images further so that we can offer like thumbnails and other things. And that will be changing a little bit later. So what we also want to do is the key that we want to pass back is profile. So this needs to, not that, that can go away. This wants to accept a private string for the key. We want to ensure that happens. So then this, you can say this key. So when we make the call, we say that our profile information comes back. Excellent. Again, we're going to want a status code. So status, no, wrong one. Status as a status, and we're going to default to OK. Always default to OK. Easiest one to move on from. Status, value, headers. Again, we can now use that header factory, default, and we've got a nice response coming back. So what else might we want? Fix that whole file. We are going to want some meta information. So meta up here, private array meta is an array. Empty array to start with. This meta profile, meta, perfect. Now let's come here. The meta information that I want to pass along is I don't know, ID for the user, maybe. User ID. Yeah, we might not want that. We might want it. Who knows? ID is that. Or we could say get a request ID. We could do a lot of different things at this point. The other thing that we want is something similar. From that, we're going to want links. So then we've got the profile, the meta information, and the links themselves. So, and that argument, shell, command, something. That is what I did wrong. So, meta and links. So, let's just move that back up there because I think that is what's causing the problem. And then we're going to have links. As an array. So we want to say that self-link is root profiles my profile. That is the link that we just did. Create as a new draft. And if we had all the header stuff, it would work. So there we go. A nice and simple request thing going on. I'm going to make another middleware. Hey, make middleware. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I've already got a request ID. So request ID is request fingerprint. Make that request. We've got a fingerprint, and there we go. So next up, we've got our profile. We might want to update the profile. We're going to come back to that part. We've done a post request. We've done a get request. Now let's look at something like, just to move those above it because they're related. Groups. We want to get group information. So I want to get a list of all groups or something along those lines. Maybe we're going to start with the feed. Let's get the feed. For this one, that isn't much middleware that I need to start with because we're starting relatively basic. We are going to prefix it with feeds as feeds, and we're going to group the base path, the roots, API, feeds.php. Different feeds. They are groups, but they're kind of different feeds that you might get back. So in API, we're going to create a new PHP file called feeds, declare some script type, use that, and then we're going to say that our root gets, we're going to get kind of a collection to start with, name, index. So now we want a new controller, API, a new namespace for feeds. I'm going to create that index controller. Index controller. So this is where we're going to look at something a little bit more advanced. We're going to say invoke. We're going to get that request, pop that request in, and we will return something shortly. So index controller. And we're just going to copy that and say use that. So now let's make a quick request to that and see how it comes back. So far, so good. So that is all registering, that's all working, and this will be the final endpoint for today, because I got other videos I got to get done today, apparently. So we're going to have a feed service so that we can expand upon it later. Feed service. So again, what I'm going to now do is concerns. And we're going to create a has auth and database trait. So the reason I'm doing this is because it is the third time I am using this exact constructor. It's got to be done, right? So now that this can say use has auth and database and it just works, I can then clean this out and say nope and nope. Profile here, we can say that use has auth and database. Clean those out. Then now we're making a new service. All we got to say is use has auth and database. So feed public function. We're going to get a list posts. Like if I want to get my main feed, I'm going to go, okay, get API feeds. Give me the information that is registered to my feed. So I don't know, I'm going to call this main, maybe. So we want to get all items that belong to the main, well, belong to a verified group. This is likely to return a collection. So return post query. Literally what we actually did on Livewire the other day. So Livewire pages feed. This query is what we want. However, I'm not going to paginate. I'm going to return back the builder just like that. Builder approved. Okay, it's going to complain about that, but I'm not too worried. So let's come down here, say public function construct. Then what we're going to send back in here is a private read-only feed service as a service. What we will have is and I'll read only quickly. Our posts are going to be this service main. That's given me like a builder at this point. What we want to do with that is eventually we're just going to like return. I'm just going to do a JSON response for now, and we'll refactor that out. But the data is posts paginate. So if we come back to that, we should get everything that we want. All good. Current page, lots of stuff going on. Lots of stuff. URL, everything's all in there. Links are in there. Previous, lots of cool stuff. Good to go. Right. So we've got lots of stuff that we can do at this point, but we want to cache information. Now, this is where we need to add e-tags and stuff like that. So on our this one specifically, we've got to add some middleware inline. So we've got cache.headers. Now, if we go to here and say Laravel docs, cache headers, we can pretty much grab all of that because this is public. We want it to be cached for a long period of time based on an E tag. So that is now returning back with an E tag. And as soon as that data changes, the hash will change and we'll get a new response. So now if we quickly go, shall we just kind of collapse this down and say, collapse data, links, total is 25, sale artisan tinker, app models, post, factory, create. So in theory, this should now give us 26. It probably won't actually. No, it won't, because the factory by default. Oh, yeah, that's going to be a pain. Okay, we'll figure that bit out. We'll come back to that bit. We'll find a nice way to display that. So the feed service is going to give us this. We're caching it with HTTP. But what we also want to do is some kind of response caching and data caching, I assume. Now, Sparsy's got a package for response caching. That bit is fine, but I also want to kind of cache the data so that we don't have to keep querying it. So the usual way is to say posts, cache, support for cards, and I'm going to do forever for now. And the key is going to be posts, page, request, get, page, default 1. And then the call, the value is going to be a callback that just returns posts paginate. Then we can just return posts. Now, make that request. Serialization of closure is not allowed. Right. Sorry. Basically, has that been cached? There's a nice way to do this. I can never remember off the top of my head. Let's go look at the cache quickly. So cache host configuration, cache get key, cache has increment, remember forever. So there's like okay, remember forever, and then you can pass a callback. I always get those mixed up. I'm assuming that's a callback, yeah. So now we've got the data, 215 milliseconds, 59 milliseconds, and we've now started to get a much smaller response size because that has been cached based on the page. And then obviously if we say page equals 2, this one will be slower. Second time faster, page 1, still fast. So things are caching. What I think we'd probably want to do is look at kind of cache and validation a little bit later, but we'll come back to that. So at this point, we've got paginated data and we want to return it. So what we want to do is return a collection response. So we can say a new collection response. We are going to implement responsible. To response there. This is going to return a JSON response. For now, just return a manual one. Return new JSON response. And let's work on our constructor. Public function construct. Now we're going to get some data. Obviously, we know we're going to get some data. Let's just focus on headers quickly. Header factory default. Private, read only, status. Okay, let's go drop that in. That's all collecting and working. And there we go. So next up, we're going to get private. We're going to get mostly paginate. Oh, well, if we're ever returning a collection, it should always be paginated. So we can say data is always a paginated length aware data stuff. So then data is going to be this, and then we're going to want that key as well. So private string key, so that in here we can say this key is this data. That obviously needs to move up. I'll put that at the top. There we go. So, let's just return a new collection response, which means that we are returning something that is responsible. The key is going to be feeds. The data is going to be posts, and the status is default. So feeds, current page, data. Okay. Now, our problem is that we're returning feeds data. We don't want feeds data. What we want is we go JSON resource without wrapping. Now send that again. That data needs to disappear. Where is that? JSON resource API resources. Make the resource, do the stuff, fill it in, all good. Is it on the resource itself? Oh, wait, no, we're not actually doing that. It is part of the length aware paginator, isn't it? Oh, God damn it. It's always something. Right, okay, so data. We are going to create a new resource quickly. So make resource, and we're going to create a post resource straight away. So let's open up that post resource. we've got an ID and we're going to just stick to that for now. And then this post thing is going to be a post resource collection where the resource is posts, which means that the collection response actually needs to receive a JSON or a anonymous resource collection, not a length aware paginator. So that when it does that, we got feeds, and then we got a collection of feeds, and we can keep our consistency back in our API. Right. Now that I know what I'm doing, I can come back to it. So that bit's working, feed service, feed identity. So let's just close down lots of stuff that we don't need and just finish off this endpoint here. So feeds, we've got the data. Post resource is going to need some filling in. So property read, we've got a post for the resource, and we can start filling that in by sticking this on that side, and we're just going to keep to the defaults for now. We've got an ID, and we've got content. This resource content. Like on the index, I feel like the content needs to be limited. Otherwise, your feed and the payload is just too big for an index request. So string of this limit 200, and we're just going to return to string. Now send it, and we're good. It's not overloading anything now. So next up is we're going to have the published state. Published, we're going to have the state is this resource stage value. So that stage is, we want it to be approved. So we want to say stage approved is that. Is this published? True or false? And then we're just going to have a timestamp for this resource published at timestamp. So yes, it's published. This is when it was published. Nothing overcomplicated. Then we're going to say handle is this resource profile handle. Who was this published by? What's published? Who published it? Where they published it? The group it was published in, we're going to say name, this resource group name. We will pass through the ID for it in case we want to display a way to click through. We've got ID and name. So then if we quickly look at group, do we need anything else? Name description. I don't know. I suppose we could do like an avatar for reasons. Images, avatar, this resource group avatar. Oops. And the cover, this resource group cover. We'll stick to that for now. Timestamp on null. Okay. That is potentially nullable. So there we go. Attempting to lazy group on. Okay, so let's open up that feed service. We're loading in profile, but we're also going to want to load in the group. Feed service. That should, by default, with all of that. Okay, so fail artisan cache clear. There we go. So we've got ID, content, whether it was published and when it was published, who by, and a little bit of group information. And that is that. It's cached. It's good. We can move forward. Obviously, that should all be in the latest because it's all coming from the service. So everything's all kind of just main feed is good. We can later on look to apply those kind of personalizations to the feed, which we want to do. But that endpoint is complete. That is how easy it is. So we can even move that to here. So we're not instantly overwriting. And then this, we could even move to there and make this just one big old return. And that is the sort of controller I like to write. So we're invoking it with a request. We're getting a collection from it. We're marking the response the way we want it to be, passing in some collection data, which we've customized. We're caching based on the page, and we're passing back the pagination. Now, I wonder if there's can you do tags? Ideally, I'd want to do tagged caching, not page-based caching. So I can tag it with posts and then just delete all from a tag when we're invalidating cache. But maybe next time. I've gone for an hour, 20 minutes today. We've got a good couple of API endpoints. That's it. So again, thank you for joining me. This is how Steve does APIs. What I'm going to do later is once I've built part of this API, I'm going to push my API through an API review, an honest one. We're going to go through API insights. We're going to see how good we're scoring. We're going to analyze any documentation that we might generate or create and say, okay, so Steve says this about these APIs. Here's one he built. How good is it? That's what I want to see. So until next time, have a good day, stay awesome, and catch you later. Bye-bye.